If you walked into the Louvre Museum on the morning of Tuesday, August 22nd, 1911, you would have witnessed something impossible. An empty space, 4 bare iron hooks, a dusty rectangle on a red wall, nothing else. The perfect crime had one unbelievable consequence. Nobody even noticed. Not the guards, not the curators, not the police. For over 24 hours, the greatest masterpiece of the Renaissance was replaced by a patch of dirty wall, and the world kept spinning. Believe it or not, before this theft, hardly anyone came to the Louvre just to see the Mona Lisa. She wasn't the museum's biggest attraction. She wasn't even the most famous painting in the room. That changed because of one man. On Monday, August 21st, the museum was closed for maintenance. A man walked out of a broom closet, unhooked the masterpiece, stripped it from its frame in a dark stairwell, wrapped it in a white smock, and walked out into the Paris morning. The heist was so simple it paralyzed the French government. When the public finally realized what happened, a bizarre panic set in. Thousands of people queued outside the Louvre for weeks. They paid admission just to stare at the empty space on the wall. This is the true story of Vincenzo Peruggia. He didn't just steal a painting, he manufactured a global icon. If you're already hooked on how a simple carpenter fooled the world's biggest museum, hit that subscribe button right now. We cover forgotten history stories just like this every single week. The greatest art theft in history didn't begin with a master criminal. It began because security at the Louvre was laughably bad. The palace was a labyrinth patrolled by a skeleton crew. Many guards were elderly, underpaid, and prone to napping on velvet benches. Security was a joke. Journalists regularly mocked it. One reporter even spent the night hidden inside a sarcophagus, just to prove he could. Vincenzo Peruggia knew this. Peruggia wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was 29, an immigrant, a carpenter. Poor, proud, invisible. The Louvre had recently hired a firm to encase its most valuable paintings in heavy glass to protect them from vandals. Peruggia was one of the workmen. For months he wore the standard white canvas smock of the maintenance staff. He knew the guards, he knew the unlocked doors, he knew the blind spots. He belonged there. But as he worked, a dangerous obsession took root. Peruggia was fiercely nationalistic. He possessed a twisted understanding of history, genuinely believing Napoleon had stolen the Mona Lisa from Italy. He didn't care that Leonardo da Vinci had actually sold it to the King of France legally. In Peruggia's mind, the painting was a hostage. He was going to liberate her, avenge his country, and return home a hero. There was no dramatic break-in, no shattered glass, no guns. Just a man walking to work. On Sunday night, Peruggia hid inside a narrow storage closet among brooms and buckets. He waited in the dark for the building to empty. At 7 a.m. Monday, the museum was silent. Only a few cleaners and contractors walked the corridors, all wearing the exact same white smock. Peruggia stepped out. He adjusted his collar, walked into the gallery, and lifted the Mona Lisa off its hooks. He didn't hesitate. He carried the heavy wooden panel into an abandoned service stairwell. Then came the first snag. The painting was encased in a massive gold frame and a thick glass shadow box. Working frantically with a screwdriver, he stripped the frame away. He was left with just the bare wood panel. He tucked it under his sleeve, draping his white smock over it, hoping he looked like a workman carrying a structural board. At the bottom of the stairs, he hit his final obstacle. The iron exit door was locked. The entire plan almost died because of one locked door. One piece of metal nearly erased him from history. He rattled the handle. Nothing. Footsteps echoed from above. A museum plumber was walking down the stairs. If he raised the alarm, it was over. Instead, the plumber saw the white smock and the screwdriver. He assumed Peruggia was just a colleague struggling with a jammed lock. "Here," the plumber said, pulling pliers from his belt. "Let me help." In a beautiful stroke of historical irony, the Louvre's own staff helped the thief escape. The plumber forced the bolt back. The door clicked open. Peruggia nodded, stepped into the street, walked past a sleepy guard, and vanished into Paris. By 8:30 a.m., a priceless Renaissance treasure was sitting under a dirty wool blanket on the floor of a squalid apartment. Imagine the pure embarrassment of discovering a theft a full day after it happened. On Tuesday morning, an artist arrived to sketch the gallery. He found the blank space. He asked a guard when the museum photographers would return the painting. The guard shrugged. Probably a few hours. By noon, the artist lost patience. The guard went to check the photo studio. Minutes later, he ran back, his face completely pale. "She's not there," he gasped. The Louvre erupted into absolute bedlam. The police closed the gates. They searched confused tourists one by one. They boarded outbound ships. They closed the French borders. They arrested a young poet. They dragged a struggling Spanish painter named Pablo Picasso into court, leaving him weeping openly before a judge, terrified of deportation. They were chasing ghosts. They had absolutely no idea what they were doing. Meanwhile, the public's fascination exploded. When the museum reopened, 60,000 people flooded the gallery on the first day. They walked in a silent line past the empty wall, staring at the bare iron hooks. The Mona Lisa was suddenly everywhere, printed on postcards, tobacco tins, and billboards. And all the while, the most sought-after treasure on Earth was sitting less than 2 miles away, hidden inside a false-bottomed wooden trunk, right under the noses of the police. If you think the French police arresting Pablo Picasso is wild, leave a like on the video. It helps the channel immensely, and tells me you want more insane historical crime stories like this one. A simple knock on the door can completely shatter a man's nerves. The police eventually realized the thief had inside knowledge. They checked the list of former contractors. Perugia's name was on it. One afternoon, a detective knocked on his door. Perugia opened it calmly. He claimed he had been sick in bed with lead poisoning on the day of the theft. He even produced a forged logbook to prove it. The detective nodded, satisfied. He didn't search the room. He didn't look under the bed, where a heavy wooden trunk sat covered by an old blanket. If he had lifted the false plywood bottom, he would have found the face of the painting staring back at him. Perugia had won, but he was trapped. He couldn't sell it because every criminal network in Europe was being watched. He couldn't show it to friends. For 24 agonizing months, a poor Italian carpenter slept, ate, and drank, with the ultimate symbol of high art hidden inches from his feet, buried beneath dirty socks and rusty tools. The initial global panic faded. The world began to accept she was gone forever. But Perugia didn't want a hidden trophy. He wanted his glory, and he wanted his gold. A letter postmarked from Paris changed everything. In November 1913, an antique dealer in Florence received a message from someone signed simply, Leonardo. The writer claimed to have the stolen Mona Lisa. He wanted to return it to Italy, provided the government paid him 500,000 lire for his trouble. The dealer was skeptical, but he played along. He contacted the director of the Uffizi Gallery and invited the thief to Florence. Perugia arrived by train, carrying his heavy wooden trunk. He checked into a modest hotel, completely unaware that he was walking straight into a trap. The next afternoon, the art experts knocked on his door. Perugia welcomed them with grand importance. He locked the door, pulled the trunk from under the bed, and began tossing out old sweaters and tools. At the bottom, he pressed a hidden catch and lifted the false lining. Wrapped in silk cloth was the dark wood panel. The museum director froze. He examined the subtle cracks in the paint, the delicate glazing on the hands, and the unmistakable smile. It was her. He kept his composure, telling Perugia he needed to examine the piece under better light at the Uffizi Gallery. Perugia, believing he was hours away from a fortune, smiled and nodded. "Take her. Just bring my money back tomorrow." They rushed out with the masterpiece and called the police. The next morning, a squad of Italian authorities knocked on the door. Perugia opened it, expecting his triumph, and was instantly tackled to the floor. The trial in Florence was an absolute circus. Perugia leaned into pure patriotism. He painted himself as a romantic Robin Hood, a simple workman who risked everything to reclaim the honor of his country. He wept on the witness stand, claiming the spirit of Leonardo da Vinci had begged him to take the painting home. The prosecutor pointed out the demand for 500,000 lire, but Perugia brushed it off as a minor detail to help restart his life. The Italian public fell completely in love with him. He became an overnight folk hero. Women flooded his cell with love letters and home-cooked pasta. Swept up in pre-war nationalism, the public viewed him as a hero who had successfully humiliated France. The court was completely charmed. The judges handed down a sentence that was a laughable slap on the wrist. Just over 1 year, later reduced to 7 months. Because of time served, Perugia walked free almost immediately. Before returning the painting, Italy requested a farewell tour. The French, relieved to get it back, agreed. Hundreds of thousands of Italians lined up for blocks, cheering and weeping as they gazed upon the portrait. On January 4, 1914, the Mona Lisa was officially returned to the Louvre. She was rehung in her old spot, but the room would never be quiet again. Perugia's freedom lasted only a matter of months. World War I broke out. He was conscripted, fought on the brutal Alpine front, and spent 2 years in a grueling prisoner of war camp that permanently shattered his health. When the war ended, the world had moved on. The public had forgotten the art thief of 1911. In a twist of supreme irony, Perugia eventually moved back to France, the very country he had robbed, under a false name. He opened a quiet paint and glass shop, lived anonymously, and died of a heart attack in 1925. The newspapers didn't even report it, but his legacy remains immortal. Every year, over 10 million people travel to Paris. They walk past grander, larger, more complex paintings, and crowd into a single room just to catch a brief glimpse of a portrait over a sea of smartphones. They come because she is the most famous object ever created, and she is famous not because of the brushstrokes of Leonardo da Vinci, but because of the wooden screwdrivers of Vincenzo Perugia. The greatest artist in history gave the world the Mona Lisa. The greatest art thief in history made the world care. If you made it to the very end of this heist, you are officially part of the inner circle. Hit that subscribe button right now, so you don't miss our next deep dive into history's wildest unwritten stories.